Hey everyone, welcome to Toons. I'm Luke, and in today's video I'm going to be reviewing Deathstroke, Knight and Dragons. Deathstroke, Knight and Dragons is the latest direct-to-video movie featuring the DC Comics line of characters from Warner Bros. Home Entertainment. This is going to be a spoiler-free review, so you don't have to worry about me ruining the ending for you. That's all good. So the film centres around the life of Slade Wilson, showing the origins of his character in the military, being experimented on and becoming an assassin. And the film then goes on to explore the toll that this takes on his family. It explores the dynamics of lying to his family and leading a double life, and how that ultimately ends up with his son Joseph getting kidnapped. And I know that sounds like a lot, but all this happens probably within about the first 10-15 minutes of the film. And the rest of the film is set a few years later, and it deals with all the fallout from those events. Deathstroke is one of those characters that has been used quite a lot recently. He's been used in lots of different forms of media, some of the TV shows, video games. He even had a cameo in the Justice League post-credit scene. But for those of you that don't actually know much about him, well, this film is basically Deathstroke 101. This film is completely centred around Slade Wilson and his supporting cast, which is a refreshing take, as we normally see Slade in a more villainous role, and so of course less time is dedicated to him as the villain of the piece as opposed to the hero who gets the most screen time. Slade's one of those characters that is most famously a villain to the Teen Titans, but he's also been a big Green Arrow villain and lately a Batman villain. So I think people get to see him a lot, but you very rarely get to dive deep into the character. Of course, with any character that has been around in the comics for so long, there is quite a lot of history there, even if it is spread out thinly throughout the character's history. Well, this film opts to take different pieces from Slade's past and tie it all together in one film, in a fairly original and unique way that I really enjoy to see. Sure, if you are familiar with the character from the comics and you know a lot about him and his family, some of the twists in the film you are going to see coming. However, that's not necessarily because they're adapting a story directly from the comics. It's more just you are aware of the character's lore and you pick up on things that have been seeded earlier in the film, and you can just tell how that's going to play out later in the film. Now I should mention that this was originally not just a film, it was a digital online series on the CW Seed app. Much like previous films Vixen, Reign the Freedom Fighters and Constantine City of Demons, this film was originally broken up into roughly 5-minute episodes and would then later be released as a film compiled together. However, this full, roughly 18-minute film hadn't been released. Roughly the first half of the film, about the first 35-40 minutes, had been released in this short format on the CW Seed, but the entire second half of the film was brand new content that you may not have seen before. Now, I actually never watched this film in its shorts format. I simply opted to wait for it to come out in movie format. The CW Seed isn't actually available in the UK, and so for me to find them in the short format is a little bit more legwork than it should be. So instead I just opted to wait for the film release. So I'm not going to be able to compare how much of a better experience this film is as to watching it as shorts, but of course the shorts were released week to week. And of course watching a film in 5-minute chunks isn't the most ideal way to watch a film, particularly when they were never going to release the second half in that format. So it was great to see the film in its entirety. That's how I watched it, and I think it is definitely the way to watch it. But I would also like to point out that I don't think it was particularly noticeable that the film was in 5-minute chunks. For instance, with the previous Vixen film, it was kind of noticeable that you could cut the film up into 5-minute chunks, as in every 5 minutes something was either resolved or there was some form of cliffhanger, and it was noticeable that the film probably could have been cut up into 5-minute chunks, and that's because it definitely was. Whereas I'm not saying this film definitely doesn't have that apply. There were definitely segments where you were like, oh, that's a 5-minute flashback, that was probably one episode. It wasn't something where when I watched the film I noticed like a fade to black every 5 minutes. I was never taken out the film knowing that they were shorts. You could just watch this film thinking it was made as a film, and I don't think your enjoyment is going to be hindered in any way because of the format it was originally released in. Another thing I do want to mention about the CW Seed shows, the first 2 shows that were released on the CW Seed Vixen and Reign the Freedom Fighters were both made in the Arrowverse or the CW-verse continuity, meaning that they'd feature the voices of the cast of the live action shows, and the likes of The Flash and Green Arrow would make cameos in the show. And that was of course because it was on the CW seed and those shows were on the CW. It was perfect synergy. And yes, Deathstroke was a fairly large player, particularly in the earlier seasons of the Arrowverse. However, this is not that version of the Deathstroke character. That version has had his own origin on the show, and this is completely separate, as well as the Constantine series being set in the continuity of the Justice League Dark films. So yeah, it's completely original, it's not tied to any pre-existing continuity. I'm not sure if they'll ever do a follow-up, or they'll make more films in this universe. But I did really enjoy this film and the world that they built around it. One particularly unique element I loved about this film was the art direction. I loved the character designs in this film. They had a really graphic quality to them. They were very angulated, but not in the same way of previous animated films. We actually had a new character designer for this. They were designed by Chris George. They weren't designed by Phil Barrasso, who normally does the designs for these shorts and films, who I do love his work, but we've seen so much of it recently, it's just refreshing to see someone else's take. Like I said, they had a really graphic nature to them. I think it was a mixture of his angulated designs and the way they'd opted to shade them, rather than having like the classic like half-tone shadow shader thing. Every shadow was just completely black, and it just helped make the film look more like a comic book. Just very graphic in nature. Also a lot of the effect animation, for instance the smoke and the blood, all seemed to be textured. It had like a Ben-Day dot texture on it. That just of course made the film look slightly more comic and graphic in nature. Yeah, overall this film just looked really nice, and it was a refreshing new take on the DC universe. And to be quite honest, I don't really have anything bad to say about this film. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a great story from start to finish. I loved the look of it, I loved the pace, the characters, I loved everything about it really. So if you're someone that's interested in Deathstroke, I would really recommend it. Now I will say this film is quite gory and violent, which is something that I'm not normally overly keen on. It isn't something that I'd normally let stop me watching a film, but it's not something I'd ever really praise in a film. It's not something I particularly enjoy. However, the way it was done in this film was so over the top and cartoonish, despite being a fairly serious film. It helped create a really interesting stylistic approach to the film, and even someone that's as squeamish as me was completely fine with seeing the cartoonish blood like flow out of Deathstroke's enemies. Yeah, so overall I really enjoyed this film. I don't really have any negatives to say with this film. I enjoyed the story from start to finish. I love the design and the visuals of the film. I think the writing was good, the pacing was good. I enjoyed all the characters, and I do think it was really nice to get some focus onto Deathstroke in what a slightly more anti-hero role, as opposed to how we normally just see him as a villain for the Teen Titans, or a villain for Green Arrow, or a villain for Batman. This time he's front and centre, and we really get to see the strength of Deathstroke's story. I love the way they combine different eras of Deathstroke's storylines from the comics in what was a really neat, refreshing take on the character. If you've enjoyed this review, please give us a thumbs up. And if you want to see more like this, subscribe, and you can even hit that notification bell to be notified the next time I release a new video. Have any of you guys seen Deathstroke Knights and Demons, or are you really excited to check it out after listening to this review? Well, let me know down below. I'd love to talk to you about it. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Cheers. Thanks for watching Tube of Tunes. If you want more from the channel, hit subscribe. If you want to keep up to date with what's going on, follow us on our socials. Hope you liked it. Cheers.